Mr. Fukuyama, thank you for being with us. First question is, how is the world going to be after this economic crisis?
I think it's very hard to predict. I think many things will change. Obviously, the balance between the state and the market is going to swing in favor of the state, including in the United States with the measures that Obama is taking. But the real question is how far that pendulum will swing. Will it undermine free trade and the kind of globalization that we've seen in the past couple of decades? And I think there's a danger that that will in fact happen, because there are a lot of nationalist pressures now to protect domestic markets. But part of that will depend on leadership, and it will depend on how severe the recession is.
One of your recent books is on the economic gap between the US and Latin America. How prepared is Latin America for this economic crisis?
Well, actually, Latin America is doing much better than in previous decades. The banking systems in Latin America, compared to the American banking system, are actually much more solid. Macroeconomic policy, apart from some countries like Venezuela and Argentina, are actually quite solid. Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, I think, have been doing all quite well. The main problem is exports, because a lot of the growth in Latin America has depended on commodity exports to not just North America now, but China and other markets. And obviously, global trade is falling off. But I think, all things considered, Latin America is in better condition to weather this downturn than previous ones.
Recently, some Latin American countries have changed their constitutions, and they permit now the re-elections of the presidents. Is that good for democracy?
Well, it's a sensitive question, because Colombia is having this debate right now. I think that 2 terms, as in the United States, is a pretty good system. I think a one-term presidency is problematic, because there's no need for the president in the first term to have accountability, because he can't be re-elected. But I do think that when you stretch things out beyond 2 terms, you're inviting trouble. First of all, just the process of trying to get the 3rd term written into the Constitution requires a lot of political capital. I think President Menem in Argentina squandered his legacy by trying to get a 3rd term. And I think that, in many respects, what's important in a presidency is the office of the president and not the individual president. And so I think that what presidents ought to look to is to build the office, to build political parties, to build institutions that last beyond the tenure of one particular individual. And so I would say, all things considered, something like the American system is probably about right.
In your essay, The End of History, you said that political and economic liberalism is the final chapter of the history of the ideas. 20 years after, do you still believe that?
The current crisis is not a crisis, I think, of free markets per se. It is a crisis of a particular, unfortunately, American model of capitalism, which in the financial sector has really not worked the way it was advertised. But I still don't really think that there's much of an alternative to a market economy, and I really don't think there's much of an alternative to liberal democracy as a political system. If you think, what are the alternatives to liberal democracy and a market economy right now? You have, chavismo, which I think is not a serious way of governing a country in the end. You have Russia and China. Of those, China probably represents the most successful model, but they themselves have a lot of problems in their internal governance, and Russia is really dependent on high energy prices. So I still think that, in many respects, the fundamental point of the end of history is still remains.
Why do you criticize chavismo?
The problem with chavismo is not that Chavez appeals to the poor, because I think that governments in Latin America have not paid enough attention to the problems of poverty and inequality. And therefore, a lot of people feel left out of the democracy. And so I think that Chavez is a symptom of a deeper problem of social exclusion, inequality, all of these things. The problem with chavismo is twofold. First, his solution is not sustainable. If you have a petrostate like Venezuela, maybe you can pay for those programs while oil prices are high, but the state has been run completely irresponsibly in terms of long-term investment and so forth. And the second problem is I don't think he believes in democracy. I think he believes in his own power, and I think that he's done, you know, a lot of things. Although people vote for him in referenda, he's done a lot to undermine free press, the possibility of political opposition, and those are all really critical components of a real democratic political system.
You supported Barack Obama for President of the United States. Are you happy with his first 100 days?
You know, every president is going to do things you don't completely agree with, but I think that in general he has taken the opportunity presented to him by the election and by the crisis and moved forward on a, you know, I think a agenda that I broadly support. It's very ambitious, and that's the fear that a lot of people have, that it's a little bit too ambitious at this point. But I would rather have him be too ambitious rather than not ambitious enough.
Thank you, Mr. Fukuyama. Y a ustedes, gracias por acompañarnos.